In the forgotten pages of history, there existed an army feared by all, an army whose armor burned brighter than fire, whose swords dripped with the fury of 1,000 battles, and whose name chilled the hearts of kings. They were known as the Crimson Army. But this is not just a story of war. This is the rise, the betrayal, and the unstoppable wrath of an army that refused to kneel. Welcome to the wrath of the Crimson Army. The story begins in the ancient kingdom of Sarvak, a land torn apart by greed, famine, and endless invasions. When the people lost hope, one warrior rose. His name was General Draven, a man forged by loss, hardened by suffering, and destined for greatness. Kale gathered warriors, not with promises of gold, but with the fire of courage. He found them in the forgotten corners of the kingdom. Disgraced knights seeking honor, farmers whose lands were stolen, and outcasts who had nothing left to lose. He didn't offer them riches. He offered them a purpose, a chance to fight back. Kale's training was unlike any other. It was brutal, relentless, and unforgiving. He taught his soldiers that a shield was not just for defense, but a weapon. A sword was not just steel, but an extension of their will. They learned to fight as one, a single, unstoppable force. Their armor, stained with a unique red clay from the Sarvak Mountains, and hardened in dragon's breath forges, gave them their name, the Crimson Army. They became more than soldiers. They were brothers and sisters, bound by a shared dream of a free society. Outnumbered 3-1. Conventional wisdom said they should flee. The Crimson Army moved like ghosts through the mist, their red armor a terrifying flash in the gloom. They struck with a disciplined ferocity that shattered the enemy's formations. That day, the world learned that the Crimson Army was not just a rebellion. It was a reckoning. News of their victory spread like wildfire. Hope, a long-forgotten feeling, began to flicker in the hearts of the Sarvak people. The Crimson Army grew, their ranks swelling with volunteers inspired by Kale's unwavering resolve. They liberated villages, drove back invaders, and restored order to a land that had only known chaos. Draven became a living legend, a symbol of defiance against tyranny. But as his legend grew, so did the shadow of jealousy in the halls of power. King Theron, the ruler of Sarvak, watched Kale's rise with a mixture of relief and growing fear. He had allowed Kale to form the army, seeing it as a necessary evil to protect his throne. But now, the people didn't cheer for their king. They chanted Kale's name. The nobles, who had long profited from the kingdom's misery, saw Kale as a threat to their power and wealth. They whispered poison to the king's ear, painting Kale not as a savior, but as a usurper with his eyes on the crown. It was meant to be a hero's welcome, but it was a trap. As the Crimson commanders entered the royal banquet hall, the gates slammed shut. Archers appeared on the ramparts. King Theron stood on his balcony, his face a mask of cold betrayal. The massacre was brutal. Kale's commanders, unarmed and caught by surprise, fought valiantly but were ultimately overwhelmed. Kale himself fought with the fury of a cornered lion, but even he could not defeat an entire garrison alone. Wounded and captured, he was forced to watch as his loyal friends were cut down. King Theron and the nobles believed they had extinguished the flame of rebellion. They were wrong. They had only turned it into an inferno. In the deepest, darkest dungeon of the royal castle, Draven was left to rot. But his spirit was not broken. The betrayal had not extinguished his fire. It had stoked it into a raging blaze of pure, unadulterated wrath. He wasn't a general anymore. He wasn't a hero. He knew that some of his soldiers had escaped, that the spirit of the Crimson Army was not dead, but merely dormant, waiting for a spark. That spark came in the form of Elara, a former Crimson Army scout and one of the few who had escaped the capital's purge. She had spent months gathering the scattered remnants of their forces, hiding in the mountains and forests, keeping the dream alive. Disguised as a prison guard, she reached Kale's cell. The reunion was not one of tears, but of steel. "The army waits. General," she whispered. "Give the order." With a grim smile, Kale replied, "The order is no longer to defend. The order is to burn it down." The breakout was the stuff of legend. Kale, freed from his chains, moved through the prison like a phantom of death. Every guard, every noble who stood in his way, fell before his renewed fury. He was no longer fighting for a king or a kingdom. He was fighting for the memory of his fallen comrades. He was fighting for revenge. He and Elara escaped into the night, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. They were no longer saviors. They were avengers. The Crimson Army was reborn, not as soldiers, but as instruments of wrath. Their campaign of vengeance was terrifyingly efficient. They didn't engage in pitched battles. They used guerrilla tactics, striking from the shadows. They targeted the corrupt nobles who had plotted against them, one by one. They intercepted tax caravans, distributing the wealth to the oppressed people. They burned the estates of their enemies to the ground. They became a symbol, not of hope, but of justice, a brutal, bloody justice. The people, once again suffering under King Theron's selfish rule, began to secretly aid them. The Crimson Army's legend was no longer written in songs of heroes. It was whispered in tales of terror for the rich and powerful. The final confrontation was inevitable. King Theron, his kingdom crumbling around him, his nobles dead or in hiding, barricaded himself in his fortress. He gathered what was left of his royal army for one last stand. Kale Draven and the reborn Crimson Army stood before the gates of the capital. This time, they were the invaders. This time, they were not here to save the city, but to cleanse it. The siege was short and brutal. The Crimson Army, fueled by grief and rage, was an unstoppable force. They breached the walls and swarmed into the city. Kale Draven fought his way to the throne room, his crimson armor now stained a darker shade of red. There he found King Theron, alone and trembling. There were no grand speeches, no negotiations. Kale looked at the man who had betrayed him, the man who had destroyed everything he had built. He saw not a king, but a coward. The battle was over before it began. Kale Draven, the boy from a forgotten village, the general who built an army from nothing, the prisoner who rose from the ashes, finally had his revenge. With the king gone, Sarvak was left without a ruler. The people, freed from tyranny, looked to Kale to take the crown. But Kale refused. He had not done this for power. He had done it for his fallen brothers and sisters. He dismantled the throne, declared Sarvak a free republic, and established a council chosen by the people to rule. His war was over. The Crimson Army, its purpose fulfilled, disbanded. Some returned to their farms, others helped build the new republic, and some simply vanished, their tales becoming myths. And what of Kale Draven? He was never seen again. Some say he retired to a quiet life in the mountains. Others say he travels the world, a silent guardian for those with no one else to fight for them. But the legend of the Crimson Army, and the wrath of its general, would be told for 1,000 years. A story of how hope can be betrayed, how heroes can be forged in the fires of vengeance, and how even a fallen army can rise to bring down a kingdom. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If you were captivated by the tale of the Crimson Army, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next epic story. Let us know in the comments what you think happened to Kale Draven. Until next time.